I want to bring in our panel now for more insight. Gabby Morrongiello, Washington Examiner, White House correspondent, and back with us, Madison and Beverly. Let me start with you, Gabby. Want you to weigh in here. Obviously, this is a big night. Apparently, Roy Moore is retaking the lead in these polls. In the most recent poll, a change poll in Alabama, he's at 51% to 44%. In November, that same poll, he only had a 5-point lead. So he's actually looks like he's gaining momentum.
Yeah, I mean, we're 4 days before election night in Alabama, and President Trump is just across the border campaigning in an area that he dominated during the 2016 election. So I expect there to be a lot of more supporters at this rally tonight, maybe a lot of Alabama voters who are still on the fence of whether or not they're going to cast their ballot for Moore on Tuesday, and want to hear from the president and want to see if he makes a compelling argument as to why they should support Roy Moore come Tuesday. And I think that that's what the president's likely to speak about tonight. But he has to carefully weave that in to remarks that focus on the economy. You know, we saw the jobs numbers earlier today, and focus on what he's doing with tax reform and other issues so that the entire rally isn't zeroed in on something that's been highly controversial for the last month.
But admit that you do hope he goes off prompter.
Yeah, you know, I can't say that I don't. I'm a reporter, so.
Okay. Beverly. You know, obviously, while Roy Moore has some momentum, Doug Jones, I'm not sure what he has done to capitalize initially on the headlines. And since then, I know that in the last 24 hours, there was one ad that was forced down on YouTube and a couple of local Alabama stations. There was also a mailer aimed at black voters that backfired miserably. It feels like he's really flailing right now.
Yeah, I think he may be a little bit scared. And by the way, I do think President Trump is going to go off prompter. He's been calling Doug Jones the Schumer-Pelosi puppet, so I would expect to hear that in tonight's rally. But the one thing about Doug Jones, I think this really matters when it comes to the voters in Alabama. We're talking about a state that generally is pro-life, and you're talking about an individual not just supports abortion, but also late-term abortions. And that is what we're hearing a lot from the Roy Moore campaign. I do think that we see the numbers out there that Roy Moore is likely to win. Of course, polling can be wrong. I think Democrats are getting scared, and they're doing whatever they can to maybe sway anyone who may still be undecided.
In fact, maybe, Madison, this would account for Al Franken being forced to fall on his sword yesterday in anticipation of perhaps Roy Moore winning and at least being prepared to take the moral high ground, if you will.
You know, the one thing that I think is so important that many people are forgetting here is the concept of innocent until proven guilty. In this case, a lot of people looked at Roy Moore and said guilty until proven innocent, and that is not the United States way, and that's not the American way. And so the criminal justice system in this case, the statute of limitations is up. And so that's when a lot of people are coming forward and saying, you know, it's up to the Alabama voters to make that decision on their own. But one of the key pieces of evidence that many people relied on leading up to this point was that yearbook, which as today we found out was forged.
Well, a part of it was forged, a part of it, not
Correct.
The whole thing, right?
Correct.
And it still remains to be seen if indeed that was Roy Moore's signature, although the camp did ask Gloria Allred for the last 2 weeks, I think, if they could submit it to a third party for validation. That was never done. So, Gabby, there's going to be a media feast, not just tonight, but going into next Tuesday and thereafter. How do you see perhaps that playing out?
Well, first, I want to be careful to say that any part of that yearbook was forged because the woman did admit that she wrote the numbers but never said that it wasn't anything that she would have written previously. So I don't know if it's the forged or doctored is the correct definition there.
Right, I guess the initial interpretation that was everything written there was written by Roy Moore, and apparently she did add something to whatever she said he did himself. So, and
that should have been disclosed early on.
Right.
I agree with that. But, you know, going into the next Tuesday, I do think that the president is going to have a tough time standing by Roy Moore if he wins this election, which right now it seems like that is what's going to happen.
Right.
If the Senate goes into an ethics investigation, will he continue to stand by him? That's the big question for a lot of us in D.C.
We'll see, because McConnell seems to have changed his mind as well from his initial reaction. Ladies, thank you very, very much.